In this tutorial, I'm going to create a sailing boat using cardboard and paper mache. The link to the full workbook for this project is in the video description below. This project suits middle years and high school students, but I do include a modified version for junior years. More details about that one is at the end of the video. To start, you need some lightweight straw board. Draw a boat hull shape onto the cardboard. The board needs to be thick enough to stand up, but thin enough to cut with scissors. You need 2 of these, so trace around the shape to create another exactly the same size, and cut that one out too. Line the 2 boat shapes up together and use some masking tape to join the edges. Start by joining the tips on each side. Then use small pieces of tape all around the curve to join the bottom of the boat hull together. Push the tips of the boat inwards like this and measure a wooden skewer across the middle. Trim the skewer to size. Insert the trimmed skewer across the centre of the boat to push the sides out and hold them open. Then take another skewer and push the pointy end through the centre of the bottom of the boat. These 2 skewers will form the mast of the sailing boat, but they're also the main stabilising core of the sculpture, so it's quite important to get them positioned correctly. Poke the skewer about 2 centimetres through the bottom of the boat. Wind some masking tape around the base of the boat and the skewer tip. Pinch it firmly to make sure it doesn't move. Masking tape is ideal for this kind of project because it's somewhat flexible and you can really push and press it around the joints to make them strong. Now you need to connect the crossbearer to the side of the boat. Stick the tape over the skewer and the cardboard and again press it into the corners. Now to connect the mast to the crossbearer. I'm placing tape across the diagonal of the cross. It's a bit hard to see what I'm doing here because it's inside the boat, so this is a demo of what I'm actually trying to do. Stick the tape diagonally across the intersection, fold it down, then turn it over and stick the tape on the opposite diagonal and press it into the corners. Again, push, pinch and press the tape into the join. I keep mentioning this because it's very important for the overall strength of the sculpture, but also it'll make those joins look neater, squarer, and more precise. These are adhesive plastic jewels that I'm attaching to the rim of the boat. I'm using these for their shape and texture, rather than the sparkly look of them. They're actually going to be covered up. Now I'm going to add some textural shapes to the side of the boat with strips of cardboard. Cut a range of shapes and sizes of rectangles and squares. These are meant to look like wooden panels along the side of the boat. In this project I use a number of different types of glue. The first being this PVA to stick the shapes to the sides of the boat. Due to the thickness of the card, I need to bend these shapes into a curve so they stick properly to the rounded boat hull. PVA has a slower drying time, so I sometimes need to hold the pieces in place. Perhaps a hot glue gun would have been faster and easier, but potentially more painful for my fingertips, so I went with the slow but safe option. Once the sides of the boat have dried, you can add to the mast with more skewers. Trim the pointy tip and line it up along the central rod of the boat. Add another skewer to the top in the same way and wind the tape tightly around. The 2 connected skewers need to be in line with the front and the back of the boat so that you can poke a skewer in between the 2. This is where the project becomes quite advanced. I'm going to add 2 adjacent rods into the centre of the mast. If you think this might be a bit too complicated, you can skip this step and leave the mast as one rod sticking up the centre. I've included an example of a single mast boat at the end of the video to show you how this turns out. So to add horizontal bars to the mast, poke a skewer in between the two that are stuck together. Then tape them together at the cross where they intersect. Again using the diagonal pressing, pinching, taping technique on the joins. Then another horizontal bar at the top. This is paper mache glue called mixer paste. It might have other names in other places, but it comes as a powder that you mix with water. It's a low-tack adhesive that's ideal for paper mache. Or you could water down some PVA for a similar adhesive. Give the boat hull a generous coat of glue. This is white tissue paper that I've pre-cut into pieces. Cover the whole thing in a few coats of tissue paper and glue, pushing the paper into the crevices and around the corners with a brush. Don't forget to cover the joins and all that masking tape. This will make the whole thing much stronger and also smooth all the surfaces and neaten everything up. Getting the tissue paper inside the boat is a bit tricky. For this, I'm brushing the glue into the boat and then sticking the paper to the end of the brush and pushing it into the boat. It is hard, but quite important for the look and stability of the form. Once the whole thing is covered, leave it to dry completely. To make the sails rounded and look like there's wind blowing in them, I'm going to cover a balloon in the same tissue paper and glue. I'm sticking a container to the base of the balloon just to make it easier to hold, and then you also have something to stand the balloon on when you leave it to dry. I'm giving the balloon about 4 to 5 layers of tissue paper. When you're doing this, it's sometimes hard to work out how many layers you've done in any one section. So what I do is coat the whole balloon in glue, then layer the tissue paper all over in a patchwork and brush it down. Then do the same again, but this time covering all the gaps between the tissue paper pieces and brushing that down. By adding the layers like this, I know that I have an even number of layers all over the balloon, and no areas will be thinner than others. For the final tissue layer, I'm going to add some line work to a full sheet of tissue paper. I'm using some blue pens and coloured pencils to write some words and sentences about sailing. Make sure whatever writing or drawing pen you use, it's permanent when dry, which means it won't run when you brush the water-based glue over, unless that's what you want. If you were to use a watercolour pencil or crayon, for example, it's going to run and bleed when you brush over the glue, which might be an effect you like. It's up to you. On this piece, I'm going to create a pattern of blue lines to contrast with the handwriting of the other sail. Now I'm attaching the tissue paper with the writing on it to one side of the balloon, and the tissue paper with the lines on it to the other side of the balloon. Next, to add a painted finish to the boat hull, beginning with a coat of dark blue acrylic paint. I'm leaving the inside white, but with a coat of white acrylic to neaten it. Once the first layer is dry, you can bring out some of that textural detail by rubbing on another colour. To do this, you only need a very small amount of paint. Dip a rag into the paint and dab off any excess onto a paper towel. Then rub it over the surface of the boat. Be sparing with the paint. You really only want to pick up the tops and edges of those card panels which are under the paper mache layer. If the paint's too thick, it'll sink into the crevices and you'll lose the textural contrasts. And then to further highlight the texture, I'm using the same technique to add a light coat of metallic gold acrylic. Once the balloon is completely dry, you can remove it from the container handle and deflate it. Rather than popping the balloon, it's better to make a small snip near the knot and let the balloon deflate slowly. If you just pop the balloon, it can snap the sides of the paper mache shell inwards. To make the sails, cut the paper mache balloon shell into 2 halves. In order to fit it onto the mast, I'm cutting a slit into the top and bottom of the sail, and then folding tabs which will wrap around the horizontal bars of the mast. I've also trimmed the sides of the scales to neaten and square them up. Little bit of PVA brushed along the rods, and then fold back clips to fix the sails to the mast. I'm folding the rear sail into a triangular shape and again fixing it to the mast using PVA and clips. Then, with the excess pieces of sail, some small flags for the top of the mast. To make the base, I'm using a PVC plumbing cap with a hole drilled into the centre. Brush on lots of PVA, and this is soft cotton craft rope. Leave the top under a weight to dry completely before dressing the sides of the stand. To attach the boat to the stand, I'm using hot glue. Insert the point into the hole and hold it in place until the glue dries. Then, for extra strength and stability, another big blob of hot glue underneath. And this is the finished piece. This project really needs to be completed over a number of lessons because there's lots of steps in the process, many of which require waiting for things to dry. In the course book available through the video description below, I've sectioned the project into individual lessons, so it's easier to program and plan for. As I mentioned at the start, this project has some fairly complicated techniques that may not be achievable for some students. But you can simplify the project by making a boat with a single straight vertical mast like this. So here I didn't add the horizontal crossbars to the mast. And instead of 3D paper mache sails, I added layers of cardboard sails to the centre mast. I also removed the spikes sticking out from the bottom before I went in and painted the hull. So now it can be suspended in the air rather than glued to a stand. And there we go. Thanks for watching.